welcome to the Doctor's Life Podcast with Dianne Ansari-Winn, MD. Dr. Dianne is a stress and burnout coach for doctors. With her 15 years of experience as an anesthesiologist and certification as a physician development coach, Dr. Dianne coaches doctors on how to live a rich life of purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness both at work and at home. In this podcast, Dr. Dianne brings together doctors and researchers that are experts in health, wellness, stress, and burnout, as well as doctors that have been successful in clinical practice, academics, non-clinical careers, and business to share their expertise and life experience so that you can live your own life purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness. To get free access to a PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that melt stress away and keep it away, simply register at www.dianneansari-winn.com. That's www.dianneansari-winn.com. Now here is your host, Dr. Dianne Ansari-Winn.
Hi, it's Dr. Dianne here, and I have a quick request before we jump into the show. If you like this podcast, it would mean so much if you took just a moment to hop over to iTunes, write a review, and rate the show. That is how other people will find the show and get the same great value from it that I hope that you're getting. It just takes a few moments to click a star rating and write a quick note. Now, on to the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Doctor's Life Podcast. We're here today with Dr. George Cole Jr., who is an old friend of mine and actually was one of my mentors when I switched from going to a clinical career to a non-clinical career. And when we were going through that process, he called it Going to the Dark Side, hence our title today, Going to the Dark Side, the Path to a Non-Clinical Career. Welcome, Dr. Cole. It's so great to have you on the show today.
I appreciate it. I have many fond memories of, our past when we were medical students studying for different exams, and, along with your husband, we persevered and moved on.
Persevered and moved on. So why don't you introduce yourself with your current title, what you're doing now. Very impressive, I must say.
I'm just a humble person. But basically, what I'm doing now, or I guess the title would be Medical Director, Clinical Sciences at Pharmacyclics, which is an AbbVie company. A more general way to phrase that is Medical Director, Clinical Drug Development. So right now I develop drugs, which or small molecules, and there's some technicalities behind that. But basically, I am involved in medical monitoring, running, evaluating phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 company-sponsored clinical trials.
Awesome. So you're able to use your scientific background to be in industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is that when one looks at funding to do either basic science research or even clinical research, the traditional route to that funding is now more difficult. And there was a point in my career where I was presented with an option. I could run a clinical trial, evaluate data, and affect medicine, in a positive way, as I feel as though I was doing in my academic career, but I may be able to have a greater impact. So at a point in time in my career, I had to make a decision. As a surgeon, I can only operate 36 hours a day, but if I can help develop the next 36 is true.
Okay, as I taught that as an anesthesiologist.
No comment. And last time I checked, anesthesiologists do get lunch breaks. But,
yeah.
But I figured, if I could help develop the next small molecule, whether it be a targeted therapy in oncology or another molecule that helps with congestive heart failure, another molecule that may help with idiopathic lung disease or interstitial lung disease, that may have a greater impact than my single hands operating all night long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, your journey, how you got where you are. If you don't mind just taking one step back, and I like to ask as many guests as I can, how they came into medicine and your journey to where you are now.
A circuitous route, I would say. As a young child growing up in Chicago, one of my classmates' fathers, well, a few of my classmates, their parents were physicians, but one in particular, he was a cardiothoracic surgeon. In fact, he was the chair of cardiothoracic surgery at the University of Chicago. So growing up as a young child, I've known this individual, both the father and the son, since I was in kindergarten. So I've been exposed to dinner table cardiothoracic surgery from a very young age. Always hearing about it, always hearing about the challenges, and for lack of a description, this sounded exciting. Moved forward to high school, I was given the opportunity to actually work with this individual at the University of Chicago. So my friend and I basically had the status of cardiothoracic surgery fellows at the University of Chicago for about 2 months. Now, we didn't truly have the fellow experience. We had more of the attending experience. But we scrubbed into cases 2 or 3 times a day for 2 months, and we also had a project that we had to do at the same time. And so it was at that time that I was exposed to open heart surgery. It was at that time that I was enamored and appreciated the skill of cardiothoracic surgeons.
You know, that's interesting. The theme just keeps coming up again and again, how a lot of us were mentored into medicine, or at least had someone that was close to us in medicine that helped us to see what it was like and have an experience of it before we went into medicine. Not
surprisingly, it's definitely what I would say encouraged and or propelled me in that direction. You know, this individual, his name is Dr. Robert Replogle, so it's a little bit different. He's had a leadership role within cardiothoracic surgery essentially from the beginnings of his career. So my exposure to surgery or medicine in general has always been academic medicine, ironically. I always make a joke. I didn't know there was something called private practice until I went to college. My pediatrician was at the University of Chicago. My classmates' parents were professors at either the University of Chicago or Northwestern. So for me growing up, everyone had a lab, everyone was doing research, everyone was traveling. So the idea of private practice was just completely foreign to me. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's a very different, can be a very different lifestyle. So then you went on to med school and residency, and surprise, surprise, you became a thoracic surgeon. So I completed surgical oncology fellowship at the National Institutes of Health during my general surgery residency. You know, that's what I would say catapulted me into more of an academic career, focusing on oncology. You know, just a wonderful experience. And I think it was part of that experience that led me to ponder a career outside of clinical medicine.
Where it was more research-based?
Indeed, more research-based, but also to see what that research actually did and what it could accomplish. So the idea of translational medicine, truly taking something from the benchtop and putting it in the bedside. Everything that we do, the hypothesis starts in the lab. Not done personally at first in human trial, but I do have a phase 1 trial with, I would say, an already established molecule.
That is fantastic. Your story is really fascinating, and hopefully it'll show everybody that there's more than one way to practice medicine these days. It seems like back in the day it was more clear-cut, like either you saw patients or you didn't see patients, and if you saw patients, then you were like a real doctor, and if you didn't see patients, then you weren't. And now there's so many ways for us to use our medical education and our clinical skills in the medical field and still practice medicine in a way. So our juicy topic is going to the dark side, the path to a non-clinical career. As you guys know in the audience, I was an anesthesiologist, and I retired from anesthesia 4 years ago. If you're listening to this podcast as a archive. This interview is from February of 2017. Dr. Cole was one of my shepherds from going from a clinical career to a non-clinical career. So we are going to together give you all an overview of the steps, the important steps to consider and pitfalls
Indeed.
to avoid as you're going forward. So one of the things that I picked up may be controversial to some, but since for most people, once you decide to leave medicine, clinical medicine, easiest way to do that is to get some other kind of job. So we're going to talk primarily about that. So how to get started with this whole thing, how to start looking at a non-clinical career as a viable option.
I think planning is everything. Once one realizes what is available, you can then determine what you like, whether it's, I'll say, working for a consulting firm, working for a biotech firm, working for an insurance company, or working for what's considered a traditional pharmaceutical company. Once you figure out where you want to go, then I would look into those different companies, and there are many more, but I would look into those different companies to figure out what is in there that I like, what is in there that can be my new passion. Once you determine that, then it's time to investigate people that are doing that within different companies, the one you chose, whether it's, Merck, AbbVie, Genentech, Pfizer, what have you. You have to think, do you like big, corporate, and established? Do you like small and startup, or something in between? Do you want a company that's just focused on the United States, or do you want a company that's global? Many different things to think about. But preparation prevents failure. So you have to prepare yourself. You have to talk to as many people as possible and figure out what you may like.
And you can take a good look at your current position. I did an interview a few months ago with a very well-established career coach wrote a couple books on it and everything. And she said that one of the simplest things that you can do before you get all complicated even before you start looking at other companies or anything like that, is just take a piece of paper and write positives and negatives and just start listing with your current job or with your current practice all the positives and all the negatives. So positives might be that you're established, or that your salary is, or your income is what you want it to be, or your negatives is whatever that makes you stomp to the car and think you got to get the hell out of medicine. And start looking at each one. The funny thing was, I said, well, what do you do with it? Like, do you examine it and see your values and all that stuff? And she goes, no, just look at the one that's the longest and then start looking at each one. So, maybe it's important for you to stay in practice for 3 more years because you have somebody in college or something. So those are the things that you can think about, and it harkens back to what Dr. Cole was saying about preparation. Do you need to downsize? Start looking at salaries compared to what you're making now too. And then there's also some considerations like, do you want to work part-time, maybe doing something else part-time still in medicine? That's possible to do. When I say medicine, I mean clinical medicine, of course. So do you still want to see patients maybe a couple of days a week or a couple of days a month? That's, can you work something like that out? And then there's the financial considerations too, as I was saying, downsizing, your tail coverage. We don't recommend going down to no job at all, no income at all, but if that's something you decide to do, how much savings do you have? I would also recommend do not touch your retirement savings.
Do not.
Do not. Like 10 times. don't touch it. You can make it work. You can stick it out until you can find what you need, but that is like a no-no. There's so many penalties on that. We don't recommend that at all. And my advice, and we'll see what you think about this, Dr. Cole, is to start building your next phase while you're at your current position, and try to see if you can get some experiences, just like Dr. Cole was talking about, like, doing his experiences in medicine, scrubbing in. Kind of start rolling on your next thing and try a few things out if you can before you just, up and quit. What do you think?
I think that is pertinent and very prudent advice. There are many things that one can do while they are still practicing medicine to prepare themselves for a career outside of clinical medicine, whether it's financial consulting. I would say specifically financial consulting for startup companies that are involved in either devices and or other small molecules or drugs. There are ways in which physicians can help design clinical trials while they're still practicing. There's always the investigator-initiated trials in which companies donate money to physicians to run clinical trials if they have an idea. We sponsor these trials. We support them from a financial point of view, but the physician is the principal investigator, and they run the trial, write the protocols, and they are responsible for the publications afterwards. I would say if someone has IIT, as it's sort of called, investigator-initiated trial, that is a wonderful training ground to prepare oneself for a career within industry, within clinical development, if one decides to do that. The financial aspect can be interesting if one has that desire or forte. There are many companies that, quite frankly, I would say there are many investors, whether it's a hedge fund, venture capital fund, angel investors, that will invest in small startup companies, and it's surprising how very little, I'll say, scientific and or medical advisors they have who are helping to shepherd them through this process. It's kind of ironic sometimes, actually. One of the pitfalls that we have as physicians, sometimes I would say we're looking for financial compensation. But while you're still practicing medicine, you still have, all of your valuable free time. But this is an opportunity for someone to start to think about something differently while one is still practicing medicine, to start to think about that next move so that when you're ready to make that next move, the opportunity is there as opposed to you stopping and then going to look for it.
I think that really speaks to that if this is something that you want to do, you really need to take a hard look at your skill set and what marketable skills that you do have, and what do you need to, since we're talking about taking a job and having somebody hire you, corporate life is really different than practice life. And when they're looking at you, they're looking for skills, things that you can translate into the marketplace. So they're looking for, have you had leadership positions? Did you help to run your practice? Did you have your hands somewhere near the flow of money going in and out? Did you help to train other docs? Were you a mentor in your practice? Did you do presentations? Were you in other leadership positions such as your medical societies, local medical societies, or national medical societies? Were you on even just being on committees in your hospital or in your practice? And as Dr. Cole was saying, what's your research background? So you may find that when you look at that you need to do some prep. And I would say that Dr. Cole and I together planned planned more of like an exit strategy over about 3 years prior to actually leaving my clinical practice. And some of that, have you done things that are measurable? And we'll talk about doing a resume in a little bit because it's a completely different animal than a CV. That's exactly what you were talking about, Dr. Cole. Are there other things that you would mention in terms of looking at your skill set?
Definitely, I think you've touched on all the major things. And I've come to appreciate that for someone who's gone through residency, started their practice or is working, all of the skill sets that you mentioned, I would say by definition, most physicians possess. It's just a matter of being able to put that on paper for someone who's not a physician and or learn the new language of corporate life. I would say, if, for example, if I look at surgery, everyone's been in a leadership position because you're a chief resident. You lead a surgical team every day. I would argue that leading a surgical team has the same level of complexity and headache and skill as I'm leading my study management team now.
I think you're right, and to be able to translate that into something that someone that's outside of medicine will understand, because it's not intuitive. We are behind the, both of you, surgeon and me as anesthesiologist, we are literally behind closed doors. Where people could not see what, our day-to-day is like this big mystery, of what we do every day. And people who are lay people, who are the people who are perhaps looking to hire you, they don't know any different either. So it's really important for you to be able to translate that. And one of the ways to be able to translate that is a resume that's not a CV. Dr. Cole, do you mind talking about the resume?
Of course. Of course. I would say there are a couple things, though, that all physicians possess naturally. I would say accountability, work ethic, the ability to just get it done sometimes. I think these are things that we as physicians take for granted, but will carry you far outside of clinical medicine. That being said, a resume is not a CV. I think all of us have CVs. All of us are accustomed to our CVs, and our CVs are documents. A resume, think of it as your biography. A resume is supposed to describe yourself to someone who is not an academic. It highlights your leadership skills. It's much more descriptive. You're able to, for lack of a better description, brag about yourself, but in a different way. The one thing I would do, especially for the positions that I was interested in within industry, when I applied for a position, I would turn in my resume, but I would also turn in my CV. And this was very important depending on who I thought was getting the document at the end. If it was a physician, yes, I gave them my resume because that's important nowadays, but I also gave them my CV because physician to physician, I know the physician knows how to read my CV. If I had an interview with a non-physician, my resume became more important.
That's a good approach. You can always carry extra copies with you, and depending on who you're set up to interview with, you can give them whatever you want them to have in their hands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for most of us, our CVs read like a book because that's what we're taught and that's what we're supposed to do. But our resume sort of sells us. For us academics out there, our CV sells us, but our CV only sells us to other academics.
Exactly, yeah.
It's very different.
And a resume is different in the sense that usually it has a goal, or tends to be a position or a type of position that you're looking for, results oriented too. So, for example, on your CV, you might put that you were the president of your corporation, of your group, and, that's maybe all that and you put how many years you did that. Well, in your resume, you need to put that you were the president of your group that had revenues of $20 million per year, and that during the time that you were president of the group, you increased efficiency, or, I'm just riffing, I'm just making stuff up, but
you're absolutely right.
That's what they're looking for.
Right. Absolutely right.
So they need to know, what you did and, it's kind of like you always have, when you're looking at the resume and applying interview process, the people that you're meeting with are kind of thinking, what's in it for me? What if I hire you? what do I get? What skills do I get? So I know we've explained a lot of things, and the good thing is that you don't have to do it on your own. There are professional resume writers, and I highly recommend to get a good one. And you can contact me through my website at www.DianneAnsari-Winn.com, and I can give you a referral to an excellent resume writer that Dr. Cole and I both use.
well worth the capital investment.
I've used it so many times, and it's just such a different way of doing it that to write it on your own doesn't make sense. It's just that important. Let's talk about connections and our network and support. Now, I was lucky. I was able to reach out to you. As we've pointed out, and as you guys are probably picking up here, corporate life is different than practice life, and the process is different. The way people think is different, and so it's so important to reach out to somebody that's already done this if you can, because a lot of times the people that are around you in practice may or may not understand you, like we do in medicine. See one, do one, teach one. Find somebody that's done it. And they can help you out, or find a coach. I'd use a career coach that helped me a lot, and Dr. Cole is a good friend.
But what you're saying about support seems kind of obvious when you think about it, but we may not necessarily approach it. I mean, no one starts off anesthesia by just going to the head of the bed. No one starts off surgery by just being given the knife. You have to watch someone do it. You have to ask questions. And in terms of industry, I'll say pharmaceutical/biotech industry, there's so many different areas and aspects where physicians can find fulfillment that I think it's important to find as many people as you can and ask questions. For example, in biotech and or pharma, there are physicians that are required in the safety divisions of these companies. There are physicians that are required in clinical development, where I am. There are physicians that are needed in medical affairs, which is a whole different area. And not surprisingly, there are also some physicians in business development. Which molecule should we invest in? Physicians are critical in terms of understanding the data. A traditional person who has an MBA may understand the finances behind that molecule, but it's a physician who's going to understand the science behind that molecule. And I will tell you, science always wins.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then you're considering also in the clinical trials the human aspect of that too. So yeah. I think it goes back to what you were talking about too, Dr. Cole. Don't underestimate what you know. As I think sometimes when you're looking, and I certainly did this, is you're looking, you say, well, I don't know what I can do outside of what I know. Like medicine's in my bones, but what else can I do? And the thing is that because there's such a huge fund of knowledge that we have, and our ethics, our stick-to-itiveness, the way that we approach things and our humanistic approach brings huge value in any position that we would take on. And I think that sometimes when you're so close to it, because that's what you do all the time, you just take it for granted. The vast amount of knowledge that we have. The reason why I recommend having support and having somebody help you that's already done it is that they can help you see that and help you present that. I have seen sometimes where there's recruitment efforts. Do you have any comments on those?
The best thing to do is the next time someone is at a Congress, I can specifically speak to oncology congresses now, but whether it's American Society of Clinical Oncology, American College of Surgeons, AMA, for anesthesia, it's the ASA.
ASA, yeah.
Whether you're at any of these congresses, I would initially, depending on the academic and or lecture that someone is going to, There may be an industry person there who helps sponsor the trial or sponsor the presentation. If you go to the booths, especially at oncology congresses, at the booths, they will have information about investigator-initiated trials. They will have a medical affairs section, and someone in that situation can direct you to the physicians that are there. And it's one of those situations, ask them a question. How did you get here? Why did you do it? What led you here? What are some of the steps that you would recommend?
I agree. It starts reaching out to people and connecting directly with people that are in the industry for sure. Reach out to your friends, and it's just like anything else. Your connections and your network can be really useful. And I've run into a lot of clinicians that they pull me aside and they're like, how did you do what you do? And they kind of think like, oh, you have to have this huge network or all these connections. And the main thing is that you don't necessarily, but it does help a lot. And the good news is that you can develop these connections.
I would say quality over quantity, but you can definitely develop them. Another thing that does happen, you're saying in terms of, I'd say, open recruitment efforts, sometimes the big consulting firms and sometimes the big, I'll say, venture capital firms do recruiting fairs, if you would, as you were describing, for physicians. What I mean by consulting firms, something like McKinsey, Bain Consulting, Boston Consulting, groups like that do routinely recruit physicians. They tend to recruit more directly out of med school or directly after internship. Their web pages do have information for physicians who are interested in careers in those, in those companies.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good way to go. And for those of you who are kind of social media averse, there's a lot of you out there who you don't have a Facebook page, and that's all right. But I do highly recommend, if you do not have a LinkedIn profile, start one. And if you do have a LinkedIn profile, start using that to start developing more connections. You can look for jobs on LinkedIn. You can connect to other people in your industry on LinkedIn. You can start to connect with people that are in an industry that you're interested in going to on LinkedIn. For example, you can find me on LinkedIn and you can send me a note. You don't even have to find the email or get the number and all of that. You can start to connect with people on LinkedIn. And those connections aren't as strong necessarily as somebody that you've met, of course, and you shook their hand. But you can definitely start to cultivate, get the email or set up a phone call. It's definitely a business platform for networking and for connection. And so I do recommend it as more of as an adjunct to meeting people in person. That's always best, but definitely LinkedIn more and more is becoming a way for people that are in business to connect. So don't be afraid of it.
I agree. Don't be afraid of it.
You just post a nice headshot of yourself. It's not a social medium like Facebook. So just go ahead and jump in there. What do you think is a time frame for looking for a new? By the time I was like, well, I want to pay off these debts. I want to switch my kids from private school to public school. Like all these, chess pieces on the board. I told it would take about 3 years, I would say. And even then, it felt like a leap. What's been your experience and experiences of people that you've seen?
It varies. It very varies. The one consistency, though, everyone had a plan. I think the differences have to do with how long it took them to execute their plan. And that can depend on truly what type of physician one is, what type of practice one has, and what one has done during their time of clinical practice to prepare them for something else. I know one individual, it literally took a week. It took a week, but this person had been preparing for it their whole career. And so when the opportunity presented itself to him, he literally just said, okay. He wasn't looking for it initially. It sort of happened. And you'll see that occurs sometimes, but what we tend to forget is, this person had been doing, for example, investigator-initiated trials. This person had been, doing lots of academic talks. This person had, so their involvement within industry was sort of throughout their medical career, so that when an opportunity came, his thought process wasn't as long, but I would say he had been preparing for it for 5 years. He just didn't know it.
Right.
Typically, on average, probably about a year. You think, this is something I want to do, and then you prepare for it.
When you start going in earnest. So there's no harm in if you're thinking about it, and probably, I would say, that probably 100% of us have thought about it at some point. To start looking about and just see what's out there. One question that tends to come up is, do I need an MBA to transition? What are your thoughts there?
Do you need one? No. Someone may want one, but do you need one? No. That would be my advice. I like to think I have an MBA from Hard Knocks. We as physicians can manage that skill set. We can learn what's necessary to get an MBA. I think we've already done it.
Yeah,
I think we've already
agree.
done it. So now, depending on what one's career goals are, you may need to get an MBA, as I like to call it. You may need to check that box. Some things may come a little more quickly if you have that credential, but is it absolutely positively needed? I would say no.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many more medical director positions open these days, and a lot of them, especially, for example, working for an insurance company, say, doing utilization review, being a physician advisor, where you work in a hospital and help them with, for example, quality and utilization management and Medicare, Medicaid, that kind of thing. They're really looking primarily for your clinical experience, and they will teach you more of the details of what they, the specifics of doing the job. What they really want is your brain and your fund of knowledge. And they can teach you the details of that kind of work.
Without question. I remember when I was in college, folks who started off at that time, Arthur Anderson. Arthur Anderson just wants to know that you know how to learn and that you have a brain. They will teach you how to do everything else.
Might be a little bit easier these days than, say, like 5 years ago to make that transition. There's, it's not a technical term, but what I would consider like a sort of an entry-level job or medical director position. That what they're looking primarily for is your clinical experience, your willingness to learn, and they'll teach you what you need to know. And as you get more into the finance part of it, even so, I was looking for a medical director position about 2 years ago. And during the interview, the person that was interviewing me, who wasn't a physician, said he was interested in having me take a leadership role as a physician in that company. And I said, I don't have a lot of financial experience in running budgets and stuff. And he said, well, that's what we have an MBA for. That's they're on your team. You don't have to do it.
We have someone to cover that skill set. We need your brain. We need your natural leadership abilities.
Right. So don't count yourself out, is what we're saying. Well, Dr. Cole, I so appreciate you taking the time out to talk about this subject. I had to choose you because you were the one who held me by the hand and answered all my text messages and my phone calls when I was looking for a non-clinical career, and it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today.
Happy to do it. Tell everyone if they have a question or something, please feel free to contact me. And, I think at the end of the day, life's too short, and you want to be happy, and you want to be fulfilled. So one of the things I always say is, if you're hitting your head against the cement, and then you stop doing that, you say, wow, this feels great. My question is, why are you hitting your head against the cement in the first place? Just feel great.
I completely agree. Well, of course I agree because I took your advice. Yeah. Well, thank you again. I really, really appreciate this. And I hope you all have enjoyed this series. Let us know. Let me know on the website, www.DianneAnsari-Winn.com, if you have show ideas, if you have comments, and want me to forward a message on to Dr. Cole. If you want to hear more like this, let me know. I want to bring you what you are looking for in this podcast. So please feel free to reach out. And with that, we'll say goodbye for this episode. Goodbye, everybody, and thanks again.
Thanks, Dianne, and thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Doctor's Life Podcast with Dianne Ansari-Winn, MD. Go to www.DianneAnsari-Winn.com to read show notes, listen to past episodes, share your comments and show ideas, and pick up your free PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that will melt your daily stress away. That's www.DianneAnsari-Winn.com.